I thought this week I'd carry on with the sort of textiles fabrics project that I started last week. So I know one or two of you are interested in carrying on, but if you've had enough, by all means, go on to another subject. So last week I was really focusing on just plain fabric. So I used my blanket here, and just sort of kind of hung it over the back of the chair, and was really looking at the way the light, hits some of the folds, and then you're getting shadows in the other bits as well. So it was really just trying to follow these edges, looking at the shapes and the edges of the folds, and it was quite interesting to paint. So that is, I would say that is, if you're going to have a go at the fabrics, definitely start with something fairly simple, just like a plain fabric, just loosely folded or loosely arranged. If you wanted to go on something a bit more challenging, and this, to be honest, is a big step up. It's a lot more challenging. I find these sort of things really quite attractive patterns, and but they are very difficult to paint, or quite difficult to paint. With this one, I had the idea of perhaps, conventionally I would paint all the darks first, and then paint the pattern over the top of the darks. But I just thought it might look better if I did it the other way around, and almost like painted the light shapes, almost kind of had those as negative shapes, if that makes sense. So basically leaving the light and then painting the darks around them. So what I did, so that's how far I got with that demo this morning, and I'll carry that on in a minute. What I did though to start with was a little bit of drawing out. This is this is still wet, so I basically just put some yellow over the whole of the board. I'm really looking for something like this colour here in the middle, the lightest colour I can see. As you know, I don't tend to work on a white ground with oils or acrylics. I tend to like a toned ground. And then what I've done then is I've scratched into this wet paint, roughly the outline where the pattern is. So I've used a straight edge, and anything that's in a straight line, I wouldn't hesitate to use a straight edge. I think it's nice to get nice sharp, crisp lines. So what I did was so to complete this diamond shape, I've done something like this. I've just kind of scratched into that and drawn that. So now that is difficult to see, so I've made a little bit of a slightly darker bit, so you can see. So it's really something a bit like, I'll perhaps do a little bit of one down here. So it's kind of starting off perhaps with some parallels, and then so it's literally just drawing in, just using the end of a brush, just something you can scratch into the wet paint with. So that's, it's quite a nice way of drawing in. So I can get something a little bit like that. I can do something a bit freehand if I want. So I don't know if you can see that from where you are, but that's a way that you can kind of draw into the wet paint. And then I've got something to aim at. But I'll carry this one on a little bit. The other thing that's quite important is having a good range of brushes. I tend to quite like to have a nice, sort of fairly long-haired, thin nylon brush. I find these really useful. And then I've got a few others that are nylon. There are bristle brushes, but for this I'll probably just stick to the nylon one, so I can get a nice sharp shape with these. They do lose their shape quite reasonably quickly, so I tend to keep buying new brushes every month or two. I'll probably buy a few new brushes, just so I've got some that are, once they've gone a bit rough looking like that, I can still use them for maybe scrubbing areas here and things like that, but I can't get the sharpness that I want to keep with a brush like that. So once I'm there, it's basically just kind of working the pattern in. So if I was carrying this one on, for instance, it's quite dark, kind of red in the middle, and it's really just literally just kind of adding brush marks and leaving some gaps where there's the light showing through. So that's that one. I'll do a little bit more around this one if I can. So really with this one, I started in the middle. I just found it easier to get that middle section in. So I'm leaving just leaving the colour of the board showing through at the moment. And then this sort of step design. Just mixing a kind of crimson, which I very occasionally change. You know, some bits I'll add some slightly lighter tones in, maybe something a little bit more yellow, because it's not a solid fabric. You know, it's got a few different threads in there, so to give an impression of that, I'll take it up to there. And then this bit here, again, it's like another step design here. So I'll just add some little marks here, and I've got a very faint line that I'm trying to follow there. And this is where it is quite difficult, because it's fairly difficult to see the lines I've made. So that's kind of stepping down to about there, I think. And then I've got the same sort of thing on this side. Something along those lines. And then we've then got these sort of tooth shapes. So perhaps go to a slightly bigger brush, so I can get going on that. So I can sort of block those in a little bit like that. Like that. I think I might, yeah, and the bottom one is sort of across there. So that's like that, and then, yeah, within that there's a few little almost steps, so I can just go back to the small brush and just make those little steps, like that. And then around here you can see I've got like this gold line here, so again that is just lots of these little marks like that. And same on the other side. And just leaving the design almost like a little bit of negative space in the middle. So that's the kind of, I mean, I quite like that sort of brushwork where you've got a range of different ways of putting paint marks on and then creating the image. And then the bits in the middle, those in, and it is a little bit varied. That some bits are a little bit darker, so let's go back to the smaller brush and just break that up a little bit. That will give the impression of the light sort of bouncing off that slightly sort of chenille fabric. It's quite good fun to do, but I wouldn't advise doing very much of it. I think just do little tiny bits, because you soon get very lost, and it is quite challenging. So, but again, that sort of technique you could apply to other bits of fabric maybe, or you could. I mean, somebody had go at this a little bit of this morning, which quite nice. So. Any questions? Okay, so yeah, if anybody wants to have a go at any of that, feel free. Just a quick reminder, next week we've got a 1 week break, so no class next week. I'm taking a week on this. Right. Sorry. I'll switch that off.